When we last left the SDLP, they had walked out of Stormont. Now, the SDLP was basically had grown out of the civil rights movement and to some extent old nationalist parties. It included Gerry Fitt, a very shrewd, clever, working class politician from West Belfast. Paddy Devlin, pretty much the same. He had formerly been in the IRA, but had turned his back on that sort of politics and was now for a purely peaceful approach. John Hume, he was the young, he trained to be a teacher at one stage, to be a priest, then to be a teacher, then and entered into politics. It was intelligent, it was young. At one stage it had nearly named itself the LSD party, but finally decided it would be better to call itself the SDLP, so they got that sorted out, so that a decent name. But they'd walked out of Stormont and had really put themselves way out into the political wilderness. They were no use to anyone, and it handed the initiative to some extent to the IRA. But then the Unionists came riding to the rescue, and after a series of decisions like internment and how they handled themselves after Bloody Sunday, the British government had no option but to bring Stormont to a halt. They ended Stormont anyway. And the British government had a problem. They had no desire for a long war with the IRA and British soldiers being shot and costing them millions of pounds. So what they really needed to do was to get a deal. They needed to get some sort of political deal, so that the only solution in Northern Ireland wasn't a military solution. They didn't want that. They didn't want to get into a long, hard, dirty fight. They wanted a political solution. Their idea was, if we can get the SDLP and moderate unionists to agree to some form of government in Northern Ireland, to a new way of doing business, to a new way of agreeing a democracy in Northern Ireland, if we can get enough moderates in the middle to agree, then Catholics will stop supporting the IRA. And loyalists and unionists will stop supporting the UVF. And these paramilitary groups will disappear. They'll go away. Because, paramilitaries, terrorists need places to hide their weapons. They need people to act as lookouts. They need people to hide them. They need money. They need financial support. So if we can get a good political deal into place, then maybe we can undermine support for the terrorists and we'll be able to pull the troops out. I mean, the last thing the British wanted to have were 20,000 soldiers in Northern Ireland. They had no desire to stay there, which is one of the ironic things about Northern Ireland. There were the IRA trying to bomb British soldiers out. The British didn't want to have the soldiers there in the first place. They didn't want to be in that situation. This would lead to the Sunningdale Agreement. Really came about because of a guy called Willie Whitelaw, who had been sent there by a Conservative guy sent there by the British government under Ted Heath. And Willie Whitelaw was a very clever man, very shrewd man, very laid back, found it easy to get on with people. Unionists didn't really trust him for a number of reasons. He had those peace talks with the IRA. The IRA had declared a ceasefire. And Unionists didn't like that because A, who talks to terrorists? Why would you do that? B, are you getting ready to sell us out, Willie Whitelaw? Are you going to betray us? And C, those peace talks ended on Bloody Friday in the deaths of 11 people. Injuries to over 100, 22 bombs in Belfast. So they didn't particularly like Willie Whitelaw. But he did make a good effort to reach out to nationalists and was able to make some sort of build bridges there. Another reason Unionists didn't like him, and it's worth mentioning this because it'll come up a little later on, is that he gives special category status to Republican prisoners. He was able to bring internment, wind it down and to scale it down. And so internment became less of a thing under Whitelaw. And he also gave Republican prisoners the rights to wear civilian clothes. They didn't have to wear prison uniforms. They could associate freely. Another reason Unionists didn't like him is the reason nationalists thought this guy isn't too bad. And so Willie Whitelaw was the guy who was able to come up with a deal. He had a proposal. His idea was, right, what we'll do is we'll create an assembly. We used to have Stormont, and with all these gerrymandered, boundaries and too many unionist politicians. What we're going to do this time is we're going to have proportional representation. Proportional representation means that if 40% of the population vote for your party, you get 40% of the seats. 10% vote for your party, 10% of the seats. Doesn't work that way under boundaries in Britain at the minute, but it's just no proportional representation. So if 40% of the people in Northern Ireland vote for a Catholic party, their Catholic party's going to get 40% of the vote. Of course, the SDLP love this idea. This would be a way for them to gain more seats. But he says on top of that, he says what we're going to do is we're going to have a joint executive. In other words, usually in an election what happens is the party with the most seats, with the biggest vote, gets all the government jobs. So in Britain now, the Conservatives have won the election, and so the Conservatives have the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Defence. I mean, they're all Conservatives. They decide who's in there. But Whitelaw says, no, because this is Northern Ireland, and because there's such disagreement, because we need to bring people together, what will happen is, well, if your party gets 60% of the votes, then you get 60% of the government jobs too. And if the Nationalist Party gets 40% of the votes, they get 40% of the seats. They get 40% of the government jobs too. And so you get this joint executive. And he says, and what we'll have is we'll have a nationalist and a unionist. So the unionist will be the head, the chief executive, and the new prime minister, if you like, and the nationalist will be his deputy. And that way we'll have a mixed government. They'll work together. So far it sounds like a great idea. The third part of his plan was going to cause problems. The first two parts are what we call power sharing. Proportional representation, then power sharing. You'll have a power sharing in your government. But the third part was the Council of Ireland. And the idea there was, look, there are over a third of the people in Northern Ireland feel some connection to the south of Ireland. And so what we need to do is to let the southern government feel like it has some sort of say in the north, and that these people feel that they have a government looking out for them. We need to make them relax. And so what we'll do is we'll create a Council of Ireland. Who'll be on that council will be some ministers from the south of Ireland and some ministers from the north of Ireland, and they'll arrange deals between themselves, and this council will make arrangements for the whole of Ireland. Some guys from the north, some guys from the south. Now, Council of Ireland's going to cause a problem. It's going to cause a huge problem from Willie Whitelaw's idea. The SDLP mostly love this, particularly John Hume. John Hume's going to push very hard for this Council of Ireland. He thinks it is a great idea because it offers a solution for Northern Catholics towards a united Ireland. It's a step towards a united Ireland that doesn't involve bombs. That's his argument for it. The IRA wants a united Ireland, and it's using guns and bombs. This would be a way for the SDLP to show, listen, you can move towards a united Ireland without a single bullet being fired. That's why Hume loves it. Gerry Fitt and Paddy Devlin are going to say repeatedly to Hume, back up. If you start preaching about a united Ireland, people like Ian Paisley and Bill Craig and Harry West are going to scream that this is an IRA plot, this is a British plot to stop Ulster in the back. The Unionists will never be able to get enough people to agree to it. You have to stop, John. But John Hume didn't listen to that. He felt an all-Ireland solution was the only way nationalists could get a fair deal. And he also honestly believed that the British government would never look out for nationalists the way the Irish government would. And he also believed that the Unionists would definitely never look out for nationalists. So the only way nationalists could be properly protected was if the Southern Irish government had a say in the north. He genuinely believed that. Fitt and Devlin said, John, you're pushing this too hard. You're going to have to back up. You're going to have to tone the rhetoric down. But John Hume didn't. Anyway, Brian Faulkner, formerly Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, now just head of the Unionist Party, he thought, well, this is a fairly good idea. We'll listen to this. We'll go along with this. And so they decided that they would go into Assembly elections. And that was the first part of the deal. You would have these elections to the Assembly. So remember, it was going to be elected under proportional representation. So the first elections for this were held in June 1973. Now, it's interesting, and it really gets to the heart of the problem about Northern Ireland. The majority of people in Northern Ireland voted for pro-agreement parties parties who wanted this deal to be made. So if you counted up all the people who voted for Faulkner and his followers, well, you would have had a majority of people in Northern Ireland. And the majority of nationalists were for it. And that's great news for the British, great news for the SDLP. The majority of nationalists don't support the IRA. The IRA hated this deal. The IRA bitterly opposed this deal. They settled bombs because they didn't like this deal. They hated it so much. I mean, they were trying to kill people over it. Because what this deal said is that Northern Ireland would remain part of the United Kingdom so long as the majority of people wanted it to be. They couldn't care less what the majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted. From their point of view, Ireland was meant to be a whole, was always meant to be a whole island, always meant to be a whole nation. They didn't care how many people voted. They hated the deal. But the majority of nationalists voted for it. So there's more good news. The majority of people in Northern Ireland want it. The vast majority of nationalists want it. Here's the problem. The majority of unionists did not. Brian Faulkner, and probably at this stage the majority of Ulster unionists were for it. But there was the Vanguard Party, which was led by Bill Craig, who was a headbanger who talked about having to liquidate the enemy in Northern Ireland. He held rallies which reminded some people of the sort of thing that Hitler and Mussolini used to do. You know, he would fly over in an airplane and these guys would drive past in big rows of motorcycles. If you could imagine Ulster Protestants trying to put on a fascist rally, it pretty much looks like what you'd imagine it looked like. I mean, it didn't look great and it looked a bit silly. But this was the sort of thing he was into. Then, of course, there was old Liam Paisley. And then snapping at Faulkner's heels, there was a guy called Harry West, who was an old farmer, old reliable unionist type who just didn't trust the British, didn't trust the Irish, didn't trust the SDLP. The guy had trust issues. And Harry West generally did not think this ideal would work. And so there were a lot of guys who were elected to the Assembly, part of Faulkner's party, who agreed with Harry West. And he felt that Harry West was right and would have liked Harry West to take over the party. But Faulkner genuinely had enough pro-agreement unionists to be able to form a majority within the Assembly. It's just the majority of unionists weren't really with him. You know, the majority of his party. But if you added up all the unionists, Ian Paisley's DUP, the Vanguard Party, and if you added on those guys who were behind Harry West and his own party, the majority were actually against Faulkner. The majority of unionists. Still, he had the largest group of Assembly members behind him, and so he would be the chief executive. He would be the guy who would be in charge. And so they all toppled off the Sunningale to try and form a little agreement as to how this government would work out. And in particular, they needed to get this Council of Ireland sorted out. They needed to work out how the north and south of Ireland would work out. Now, the Irish government went to Sunningdale, the British government went there, Faulkner went there, the Alliance Party went there, the SDLP went there. The Vanguard did not go, the DUP did not go. They sat together and they hammered out an agreement on the Council of Ireland. Now, Faulkner's line was, listen, this Council of Ireland's a good thing. The Council of Ireland would be ministers from the south of Ireland, ministers from the north of Ireland would meet together, but unless everybody agreed, they couldn't make any decision. So unless the ministers from the north said, yeah, we're going to go ahead with that idea, nothing could happen. So he said, listen, this gives the south of Ireland no say over the north that we don't agree to. There's nothing to worry about here. And the other good thing here is, for the first time, the Irish government will have to agree, as part of this agreement, that unless the majority of people in Northern Ireland vote for United Ireland, it's not going to happen. So he said, look, this is a good deal. Unfortunately, at the other side, there was John Hume harping on and on about how this was the first step towards a United Ireland. Now, it can't be both. You can't say this is a way to protect Northern Ireland from becoming a United Ireland. You can't say that this deal makes it sure that Ulster will always be British and also be the first step on the way to United Ireland. And John Hume kept preaching this is a step towards a United Ireland. And that causes the first difficulty. It's what Fitt and Devlin had warned against and said, look, you're pushing too hard, you're pushing too fast. The IRA then decided that they would explode a few bombs in London just to show how much they really didn't like democracy. So that happened coming up to Christmas. On the 1st of January 1974, the power sharing executive actually took power in Northern Ireland. So 1st of January 1974, power sharing executive takes place. The Ulster Unionists very quickly started turning against this agreement. They did not like the Council of Ireland. That was the big issue for Faulkner. Very, very quickly, the Ulster Unionist Council, who sort of run the UUP, didn't worry too much. They just voted against him, and eventually Faulkner has to quit. This is all you have to know. Faulkner had to quit as head of the Ulster Unionists. But he took 19 out of 21 assembly members with him. He was still in charge of a majority. And so there was still enough support to keep this whole thing going. Until the British government decided that this would be a great time to call a general election for the whole of Britain. Now, Hume, Fitt, Faulkner, everybody went to the British Prime Minister Ted Heath and says, please don't do this now. We need to get some support behind this assembly, this power sharing executive, before there's any kind of election. If you have an election now, Ian Paisley and Harry West and Bill Craig are going to wipe the floor with us. But Ted Heath was having problems of his own and says, no guys, this election's going ahead. He called it the Who Governs Britain election because people were striking. And there were strikes with miners and there were all sorts of issues going on. And Ted Heath says, I'm having a Who Governs Britain election. And Ted Heath's, it was a masterstroke because he asked who governed Britain and the answer of the British people was, not you, mate. Out you go. So he lost the election anyway. Didn't help him at all. And it brought Sunningdale tumbling down. Because what happened is the anti-agreement Unionists, Ian Paisley, Harry West, Bill Craig, ran a sort of a united front against Sunningdale. They founded something called the UUUC, the United Ulster Unionist Council, and they ran against Sunningdale. And there was only one MP returned to Parliament. Now, lest you get confused, pause for a second. There were assembly elections to the new group that ran Northern Ireland. Okay, these are the guys who go up the Stormont and form an executive and form a government up there. That's one kind of election, and Faulkner's won that, but he's won it last year. Now there's been an election to London, to Westminster, the Houses of Parliament in London, and in between this, there's been the whole Council of Ireland malarkey. And so what has happened is that the anti-agreement unionists have wiped the floor with the agreement guys. And there's only one MP returned. Gerry Fitt of the SDLP is the only guy who gets elected to London who's pro-agreement. Everybody else is against it. Faulkner decided to carry on with the Sunningdale agreement anyway. He says, we'll try to make this work. That was a massive mistake. What happened is that the anti-agreement unionists then set up the Ulster Workers' Council. And the Ulster Workers' Council was all the anti-agreement guys. That was the Vanguard. That was the DUP. That was now the official Unionist Party, or the Ulster Unionist Party under Harry West. They were all there, plus Protestant paramilitaries. Now, this is crucial. Without the support of the paramilitaries, what happens next couldn't happen. Protestant paramilitaries in the UDA, under guys like Andy Terry, decide that they are going to back up the opposition to this agreement. They are going to bring the Sunningdale agreement down, and they decide that they are going to organise a day of action, or a strike. It turned out to be much more than a day of action. They're going to organise a strike. It began on the 14th of May and they decided they were going to bring this government that was running Northern Ireland down. This was a Who Runs Northern Ireland strike. There were a group of ministers who had been elected the previous year into a power-sharing executive and a power-sharing assembly, and democracy had put those guys in the previous year. Yes, there had been another vote which had turned out against that executive, but that was only to London. That was MPs to London. There had been no election called for more members of that assembly. Nobody had ever cast a direct vote against that assembly. But the Ulster Workers' Council says, actually, hang on, we'll tell you who runs Northern Ireland. It's not that assembly which was democratically elected. It's not that executive which was democratically elected. It is the unionist people who run Northern Ireland. And we're going to bring that assembly down with a strike. And that strike was enforced by paramilitaries. And if a paramilitary tells you to strike, you'll tend to strike. At first it didn't look as if it was going to succeed, but UDA members stopping people from going to work, using roadblocks, that had a huge effect. People refused to turn up at all. Tensions were increased considerably more when the UVF set off bombs in the south of Ireland. 27 people died. 5 on the day of the bombs. 5 later died of their injuries. That's 32. Apart from the Omagh bomb, which took place after the agreement, this was the worst bombing of the Troubles. So, I mean, there was by the UVF in the south of Ireland. They set off bombs in the south of Ireland. The message was, if this agreement goes ahead, we're going to kill innocent Catholics. So that was the message that went out. You had the UVF saying we're going to kill innocent Catholics in the south of Ireland. You had the UDA saying we're going to organise and run and enforce a strike in the north of Ireland. And then the new British Prime Minister Harold Wilson decided that it would be a great idea to go onto television and to insult all the Protestants who were striking by calling them spongers. Now, given that Northern Ireland had contributed quite a few people to 2 British wars, not the best thing to have called everybody, and Protestants then came out. Now, this being Northern Ireland, it probably made sense at the time, but after Harold Wilson called the Unionists spongers, they decided to wear little bits of sponge on their lapels out in the streets to sort of, I don't know, make fun of Harold Wilson. It probably made sense to them at this time. The bottom line is it made Unionists very, very angry. The British Army refused to intervene. They refused to deal with the strikers, even though there were paramilitaries involved in it. They would not intervene. And eventually, after negotiations, Faulkner eventually decided, look, he wanted to negotiate with the strikers. John Hume says, look, Brian, and Jerry Fitz said, Brian, we can't do that. We can't be seen as nationalist politicians to negotiate with Protestant paramilitaries. We can't do that and survive. And so the whole thing was brought down. This was hugely disappointing to the British government. They would try several more attempts to get something like this going again. Nothing like it would ever happen until the agreement of 1997. It led to a huge period of time when the British decided that they were just in for a long war, which is what they wanted to avoid, but it's what they got. As part of that long war, there were going to be 2 elements. There was going to be criminalisation, and that was the IRA were going to be treated as criminals, not as soldiers, as Willie Whitelaw initially had done by giving them special category status. And there was going to be something called Ulsterisation. And the idea was that we would move British soldiers out and replace them with an armed RUC and an armed UDR. There would be about, I think, eventually near 20,000 members of the RUC and our UDR combined, policing and protecting Northern Ireland with support from the British Army. So the RUC was going to lead the fight against the IRA, supported by the UDR and the British Army. And this was the policy that was brought in, also to some extent, under the guys who had tried to promote power sharing in the British government. This is what the British government wanted to avoid, but it's what the British government got. The question is, why did Sunningdale fail? What went wrong? Devlin, Paddy Devlin and Jerry Fitt believed that part of the problem was that the Council of Ireland was pushed too hard by John Hume, preached too hard by John Hume. They should have gone much easier in the Council of Ireland, and that would have given Brian Faulkner a better deal. Most historians today would disagree with that. They would say the Council of Ireland was just an excuse. It caused Faulkner some difficulties within his own party. But even without the Council of Ireland, Unionists just did not see the need to share power with nationalists. The bottom line here is, what's democracy about? That's really what Sunningdale's about. What do we mean by democracy? Is democracy about the rule of the majority? Is it about majority rule? Is it about, you get the most votes, so you get the most power because that's what's fair? Because that's how Unionists and Nationalists many on both sides viewed things. Nationalists said, well, look, we're the majority in the island of Ireland, therefore we should be running the whole island. Some Unionists said, well, we're the majority of people within the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, therefore we should be ruling Northern Ireland. So the majority rules, and democracy is a way to gain power. And it's about being fair. Most votes equals what's fair. But there's another way of viewing democracy, and that's to say democracy is a way of making sure that the people who are in charge can't be dictators and can't be corrupt and can't cheat us and can't fool us because we can vote them out. And it's a way of sorting out rule disagreements through the rule of law. Democracy is about coming to compromises. Democracy is about sorting things out without resorting to force. That's a different way of looking at democracy. And unfortunately, the majority of people in Northern Ireland at that time did not view democracy that way. Arguably, both sides, and this might to some extent even include John Hume and the SDLP, seen democracy as a way of majority rule. Hume's idea was the majority of people in the island of Ireland are nationalist, therefore they should run the whole island. Harry West, Bill Craig, these guys on the Ulster Unionist side, well, look, Unionists should run Northern Ireland. We don't want power sharing. Why should there be power sharing? Why should the smallest parties get a seat in government? That's not fair. It should be the biggest party, the Ulster Unionist Party or a Unionist Party, which runs Northern Ireland. There's no need to share power. That's not fair. You don't do that in Britain. The Conservative Party doesn't offer seats to the Labour Party if they win an election. We shouldn't have to do it here. So that's one way of looking at democracy. It's about majority rule. But there's another way of looking at democracy, and that says, look, democracy is primarily about sorting out rows without having to bash the other person's brains in, literally. It's about reaching compromise. It's about making deals. And it wouldn't be until the people of Northern Ireland were sickened of the troubles and were sickened of the bloodshed and were just so depressed at the futility of it all that vision of democracy kicked in. And that's why Sunningdale failed, because there were too many people who still felt democracy was about popular power. It wasn't about making a deal.